I'm going live. Okay, we are not live. We can start.
Great. Hi, everyone. Rojbash. Greetings to everyone who are joining us today from different places around the world. My name is Gülay Kılıçaslan, and on behalf of the Institute of Social Sciences and the community at the University of Rojava, I'm pleased to welcome you all to today's panel. Today is an important holiday for Muslim communities around the world. Happy Eid to all celebrating. Jejna ve Hemiyan Piroz be. I'm very excited to open this panel and to hear from two great feminist scholars of our time, Professor Sylvia Federici and Professor Joe James, as well as from Sarah Marsha, my friend and comrade from the Andrea Wolf Institute of Genealogy Academy in Autonomous Administration of North and East Syria, or Rojava. I would like to extend our warmest thanks to our comrades at the Emergency Committee for Rojava, especially Anya and Dr. Göner, who helped us to organize this event. Dr. Özlem Göner will introduce our speakers today and moderate this panel. But before leaving the virtual floor to her, I would like to give a few online housekeeping notes. This panel is currently live on the university's YouTube channel, and we are also recording it. We have allocated about 20-25 minutes for the questions and answers session. Those who are joining us in the webinar room, please write your questions in the Q&A box. And those who are watching us on social media platforms, please leave your questions in the comments section on YouTube or Facebook. And lastly, if you are in the webinars room, there is a simultaneous interpretation from English to Kurdish, Kurmanji, and vice versa. Please check the interpretation section for two channels of English and Kurdish. Celil Kaya is our interpreter today, and we thank him a lot for doing this. And the interpretation option, unfortunately, is not available for live broadcast on YouTube. And I would like to say this in Kurmanji as well, in Kurdish. Beşderwanen heja imkana meya vergeriye ve panele heye gel hundu khwazin ji vergere Kurdî guhdarî bikin ji kera me xwe li ser interpretationê pele bikin an jî klîk bikin û li vê derê beşa Kurdish Kurmancî hilbijêrin û hûn dikarin ew cihê interpretationê li binê ekranê zoomê di aliyê rast de peyda bikin. And I would like to also here introduce Dr. Özlem Göner, who will introduce our speaker and moderate the panel. Özlem Göner is an associate professor at the Department of Sociology and Anthropology at the College of Staten Island and the Middle Eastern Studies at the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. Her book entitled Turkish National Identity and Its Outsiders, Memories of State Violence in Dersim, that was published by Routledge in June 2017. She's a steering committee member of the Emergency Committee for Rojava, and she is also sitting on our institute's academic advisory board. Özlem, please.
Thank you so much, Gülay. Thank you so much, our great panelists and discussant, for being here. So just a word on the day, the topic, the theme for our conversation here today. I'm just going to say two things. That one is our aim is to take feminism outside of its conservative, liberal depictions of equal rights, and to see how feminists from different geographies have long seen the oppression of women as inseparable from capitalist exploitation and racial capitalist exploitation. So while emerging from various historical contexts, many Black, Indigenous, Third World, and Marxist feminists have built their theories and practice on the interconnected nature of multiple oppressions, weaving together a critique of capitalism, racism, colonialism, and patriarchy, and arguing that these systems of oppression need to be tackled simultaneously. So our panel in this sense, has a very specific understanding of feminism. And this is also building on Black women activists such as Claudia Jones, the Wells Barnett, Frances Beale, and many others who were articulating the interconnections between race, gender, and class long before the term intersectionality entered popular discourse. And similarly, Marxist feminists have emphasized the importance of gendered and racialized labor of social reproduction, reclaiming it as a legitimate arena for anti-capitalist struggle. And indigenous and peasant women have done the same. And sometimes it's important to realize that they didn't call their struggles necessarily feminist because according to them, rightfully, the mainstream dominant feminists bounded in the liberal field of equal rights discourse was not addressing their issues of dispossession and ecological plunder. So these women have been resisting against these forces of oppression and exploitation, while simultaneously fighting for the women's rights and standpoint in their own communities. And the Kurdish women's movement over the last 4 decades has similarly attempted to theorize the interlocking of capitalism, nation state, and patriarchy while engaging in the struggle for liberation, both as women and as members of a colonized people. And this is important for our panel because also unsatisfied, critical of liberal conceptions of feminism, advocating for equal rights in a capitalist society, the Kurdish women's freedom movement have developed a new conceptual framework for social sciences called genealogy to reimagine revolutionary theory and praxis from women's standpoints. So it's very important today that we're honored and humbled to have Sylvia Federici and Joy James and our discussant Sarah Marcha, who are not only intellectuals, but also fighting on the ground for a better society, for a free society, for women, and for revolutionary, broader conceptions of revolution that are beyond the liberal conceptions of equality. And one last thing to say before introducing them would be, I'm also very happy because women are usually, and feminism is usually discussed, right, like only based on gender issues. So we have these panels with man, and then we end up with another panel with women now talking about issues of gender. So this is very much a critique of that tradition of scholarship, of that tradition of conferences and panels, that we're saying that feminism here is to conceptualize a better, a free world for all. And that is why actually our panelists have long fought against capitalism, patriarchy, racism, racial capitalism in different platforms. So we're very honored today to have them. So Silvia Federici is a scholar, teacher, and activist from the radical, autonomist, feminist, Marxist tradition, and professor emerita at Hofstra University, New York. In the 1970s, she co-founded the International Feminist Collective and was one of the organizers of the International Wages for Housework campaign. In the 1990s, after a period of teaching at the University of Port Harcourt in Nigeria, she became active in the anti-globalization movement and the US anti-death penalty movement. She was a co-founder of the Committee for Academic Freedom in Africa and of the Anti-Death Penalty Project of the US-based Radical Philosophy Association. Through all these years, she has written books and essays on philosophy and feminist theory, women's history, education and culture, and more recently, the worldwide struggle against capitalist globalization and a feminist reconstruction of the commons. Thank you for being here. So I'll introduce our next panelist and discussant and leave the floor to them. Joy James is Ebenezer Fitch Professor of the Humanities at Williams College, where she teaches in political science, Africana studies, women and gender studies, and American studies. She's the author of many books, including Seeking the Beloved Community, A Feminist Race Reader, Shadow Boxing, Representations of Black Feminist Politics, and Resisting State Violence, Radicalism, Gender, and Race in the US Culture. Her edited books include The New Abolitionists, New Slave Narratives of Contemporary Prison Writings, Imprisoned Intellectuals, States of Confinement, and The Black Feminist Reader. Now, you know, these aren't only intellectuals, only academics, and this we very much care. So Joy James is also an avid critique of liberal academic discourse and conceptual frameworks that are distanced from intellectual traditions and the material realities of the people. Her intellectual and political work on a form of abolitionism that fights anti-Black regimes is deeply rooted in the Black radical tradition fighting against racial capitalism. Her most contemporary work is on the captive maternal. And last but not least, our discussant, Sarah Marcha, is a member of the Andrea Wolf Institute of Genealogy Academy. And genealogy, which she'll explain in more detail, is the science of women and life developed since 2011 by the Kurdish women's movement. It is a social science based on history, epistemology, and standpoints of women for liberating society from the impacts of sexism, capitalism, and colonialism. It is a social science and a movement towards building democratic and ecological alternatives centered on women's liberation. The Andrea Wolf Institute that she's part of is a center where women from different parts of the Middle East and the world can meet, joining the work of genealogy, as well as women's revolution in North and East Syria, known otherwise as Rojava. The Institute's projects are developing communal life, education, and research with the aim of uniting theory and practice. So we're very honored, humbled to have them here with us. And again, they're not only intellectuals, but political figures, activists, and that is very important for our conversation today. So I'll leave the floor to Professor Federici first. It's all yours. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yes, I have. So I was saying good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure about the time zones, but greetings to you all. And it's a great honor for me to be participant to this event. 20 minutes, I'll try to be really stick to very basic things to speak of why we need an anti-capitalist feminism. I believe that the need for a massive social transformation and an anti-capitalist struggle is now more evident than ever. As we look at the world now, as we see the picture under our eyes, we see that the global reality evokes the 4 nights of the apocalypse. You know, everywhere it's war, misery, in poverty, pestilence, and death. And today, once again, you know, this year with the COVID epidemic, we have seen the inability of the state worldwide, the capitalist state, to guarantee our lives. And I believe the transformation, this of course is not new. A major transformation will only be the process of a long struggle whereby many different movements, you know, ecological, labor, anti-racist, anti-colonial, and feminists, of course, will come together and will find a common ground, because all these struggles are connected. All these struggles are part, of one movement, have to be part of one movement. But I want to speak now of the importance of feminism, anti-capitalist feminism, what it has contributed to an anti-capitalist struggle. And I'll say that the feminist movement, and here I refer to the feminist movement that sees anti-capitalism as an essential condition of its politics. Certainly not the feminist movement that has been created, which I call state feminism. The feminist movement which has been created above all, by initiative of the United Nations, like to present the entrance in mass of women into wage labor, and to glorify, in fact, the expanded exploitation of women, under the guidelines, under the title of emancipation. So I'm distinguishing very much. And not surprisingly, today, many feminists speaks of feminism in the plural. We speak of feminism because there are different branches, different family, many times in opposition to each other. So anti-capitalist feminism, what has been and is the contribution, I think has been extremely important, because in a way it is the movement that in a particularly strong way has denounced and made visible the capitalist devaluation of the activities that are most important for the reproduction of our life. Whether it is procreation, child raising, the care of the elderly, etc., all the activities that are in fact essential for the reproduction of our life, how they've been exploited, how they have been subsumed to the reproduction of the workforce, how they've been organized in a way that isolates us from each other, that individualizes our lives. And I think in this way the feminist movement has opened another important window on what is the logic of capitalist society and why we need to go beyond capitalism, and also has enabled us to understand why the long-term oppression of women all through the history of capitalist society. Because, and this is the second, I think, important element of an anti-capitalist feminism, because it has become clear that capitalism is not only, as I've written in Caliban and the Wage, is not only the accumulation of wealth, of private wealth, it's also the accumulation, creation, construction, and perpetuation of hierarchies, of division, within those who have been exploited, so that, continuously, repeatedly, at every new phase of capitalist development, capitalist development is the development of inequalities. And I think that, reflecting on the issue of reproduction and reflecting on the roots, of the particular form of oppression the women experience in capitalist society, we have also begun to see the continuity between the struggle against sexism and the struggle against racism, against, colonialism. That in fact, all these different forms of brutal discrimination, and particularly colonialism and racism, have really been built, on the differentiation that capitalism has created and the creation of labor regimes, so that racism and colonialism justify, are created to justify particularly brutal, particularly intense form of exploitation that in fact are constitutional, are systemic, structural. We have seen the case of slavery, and of course, these will be discussed even further in this panel. But we have seen that at each phase of capitalist development, it has never ended. It's always been reconstructed. So in this way, I think that the feminist movement has played and continues to play a very important role, and not accidentally, we see in recent years in particular that across the world, women more and more have been in the foreground, for the defense, of our reproductive environment. Today, for instance, in Latin America, there is no question that women are leading, the struggle. They're leading the struggle against deforestation. They're leading the struggle against mining, oil drilling, all the forms of devastation of the environment. To the extent that they have been, in capitalism, the primary subject of reproductive work. They are the ones who are responsible towards the family, towards the community, the children, of guaranteeing their reproduction. They've also been more and more central to the struggle for the defense of the ecological environment, because they are very much aware. They went, for example, a mining outfit or a oil company comes to an area. This is the death knell for the community. This is the end of the community as the waters. What is happening, for example, in Colombia, today is also very much connected to the struggle. So from this point of view, I see that today, the feminist movement has a very, very crucial role, has a very crucial role in creating the kind of political program and the kind of mobilization that, as they say in Latin America, places life at the center, that, centers the struggle, on the question of the revalorization of reproductive life. And this means not just a celebration of Mother Day. This means, first of all, engaging a long struggle to force a different use of the social wealth, to move away the use of the social wealth from all the destructive activities in which it is used today, the wars, the prison, the police systems, and the many forms of production, because so much of the production that is taking place is production whose goals and whose forms, whose product are actually, destructive of our life. And I think the moving from the perspective of reproduction, thinking of reproduction not as the equivalent of production, not as something just complementary, right? But a perspective, a viewpoint that looks at social transformation and looks at our life, in a very holistic way, without separation, in a very holistic way. So they're looking at, the struggle and looking at the reorganization of our life from the point of view of reproduction. I think that, the feminist movement has a very crucial role, in rethinking, first of all, how the social wealth is used. And secondly, how reproduction itself is organized. Because I think that women know and have paid a very high cost for the fact that we have been organized in a way, reproduction that, separates us from each other, that, isolates us with the work. One of the things that concerns me often today is that many feminists in the younger generation, look at reproductive work as necessarily oppressive, right? And for example, one example, there is in one country, I've heard feminists speaking of developing a, sterile feminism, a feminism that rejects maternity, as if in itself maternity were oppressive. And this is very saddening, because women are concluding, deducing from the oppressive condition in which, so many women have been forced to experience maternity, and particularly, of course, Black women, women of color, migrant women, to this day, for instance. I mean, there's a whole discussion about what is happening now in the United States. You know, if you don't have resources, if you're Black and you decide to become pregnant, you know, some have argued that there is a criminalization of pregnancy for women who are, you know, poor and, you know, who are not white. But I think that what, you know, these young women are seeing is that, are arguing is that because historically, you know, maternity has been so oppressive and domestic work as a whole, you know, therefore, you know, these are only by overcoming this kind of activity and perhaps through, you know, robotization and other forms of substitute. Now, I think this is problematic because in reality, what has to be done is to recognize that reproductive work could, in a different society, could under different material and social political condition, you know, be a very creative work. In many ways, it's the most creative work, you know, to reproduce our life, to reproduce the life of the people around us, to care for the environment. But of course, this has to be done under the proper condition. And so, you know, to conclude my presentation, you know, some of the proposals that I've been, you know, putting forward and fighting for, particularly in more recent years, has been the idea that the feminist movement's contribution to the struggle is precisely this double move. The double move to both change the distribution of wealth, put an end to the devaluation of reproductive work. And by the way, for instance, you know, I'm part of a group of women, you know, who, like women in the reproductive justice movement, you know, have been critical of those branches of feminism that see abortion, you know, as control of our bodies, and don't at the same time fight for the kind of redistribution of wealth and for the kind of change that enables women also to have children. And this is particularly important in a society like the United States, where there's a whole tradition of denied maternity, particularly Black women, from slavery to present, of denied maternity. And so the question of the redistribution of wealth, the question of the end of the devaluation of reproductive work that can occur in many different places. We need to have a big debate on that, how it can be organized. And also the reorganization of this work, the reorganization of work in a way that creates what I call reproductive commons, that creates, you know, collective, cooperative forms of reproduction, you know, in a way that also would strengthen, you know, the ties in our community, that turns our community into basis of resistance, not just factories producing workforce, not factories producing workers for the army, workers for the industry, but communities of resistance, and that can have a different level of power, negotiating with the state, fighting with the state, and at the same time begin from the present to construct a new society, not postpone as often as being done the revolution to a time in the future that never comes. Because I don't believe there can be a struggle that really changes the world and that can really put an end to the forms of oppression, of exploitation that we experience today, unless we also begin to construct the alternative starting from the present. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So many things to think, to discuss. The floor is now Joy James. It's all yours.
Thanks. I want to thank Sylvia Federici. I was taking a lot of notes. And then I have my own statements, but there's a lot that she put on the table that's really rich and provocative. And I'm going to tried to address some of them. I mean, some of the key terms I took away were state feminism, the reproductive labor having dignity and honor, and so equity, right? It's not just equality of pay. It's like, you know, if you're taking care of somebody's 3-year-old, the pay rate for that should be that, you know, it is equivalent of white collar, you know, workers as well, right? So the whole nurturing matrix, it's not like you want to be equally paid with the male who is, you know, helping community by collecting, you know, garbage and keeping the streets clean, is that we understand that our health and our stability needs to have equity with the professionalized caste, right? Who will always be employing these other levels of workers, right? In some ways that are exploitative, not just by the hourly wage, but also by the dignity and honor that's brought to the work. And, you know, so for me, this is kind of tough, right? Because I'm thinking from a space that has no stability. So, you know, when I was listening to Sylvia, I agree with everything she said, but I think the coherence of her narrative and her analysis and her work is premised on a certain basic level of stability. So I'll just go with the biological reproductive to start, that yes, the way in which, and I'm speaking specifically to the experiences of Black women, because that's what I know best experientially, and then that's what I work, organize, and teach about. But to reproduce not just the biological child, right, but also to nurture and care is absolutely essential. But two things came to mind when Sylvia brought this up. One was Dawn Wooten, who is the African-American woman who is a nurse in an ICE detention camp. And most people, when they look at the US and what's happening in ICE, they think of people coming from Latin America. So it's the brown baby with the brown mother and so forth. But disproportionately, it's Haitians and Africans that are being deported from ICE, right? And under Biden, the numbers of deportations have rivaled or surpassed Trump. But you don't see the Black child or the Black family as the public image of the victim of ICE. So there's a way to disappear them out of the country because of the invisibility of Black suffering. And that's what I mean in part by the destabilization of the zone, right? So yes, you know, pushing for reproductive recognition, rights, labor, but if your misery does not register in the public consciousness, then it's fairly difficult to organize around these, you know, tragedies, exactly, or to push movements towards radicalism in the rebellion of these types of uses of police forces. So Dawn Wooten is the Black nurse. She was invited by Women in Gender Studies to speak at Williams by Zoom a month or so. And her narrative, of course, is painful because she's fired and drummed out of her job, but she's reporting what she called the womb collector. And the New York Times just reported today that federal charges are coming up against the doctor who is performing forced hysterectomies, which is really just psychological and emotional warfare against the women. It's not like if they're in ICE detention camps, they're not going to be procreating, right? Unless they came already pregnant. So if you're giving them hysterectomies, I mean, it's a terror campaign focused around the mutilation of the body, that this will teach you to come into the United States and document it. And this is how vile white supremacy is, because in the US it's proto-fascist. So back to Dawn Wooten. She reports it first to other staff and nurses. So these are all women who know there's a womb collector as a male, sorry, he's not Black, I believe he's South Asian gynecologist. And the other women, I believe, are women of color or also Black. So even though they're all women and presumably all progressive or feminist or equal pay, equity, et cetera, they've allowed Haitian women, African women to be violated, right? And basically driven to the point of a nervous breakdown, some of them. I mean, according to Dawn, they were having breakdowns with, my partner's gonna leave me because I can never have children, and we wanted children together. So it's like their lives are basically ruined, and you're gonna deport me on top of, you know, this kind of Nazi experimentation program. And I use that word advisedly. So in a destabilized zone, what is sisterhood among Black women? And in a destabilized zone, what is the role of class and caste? Because, you know, Dawn Wooten as a whistleblower is basically forced out of her job. And the last time I heard her speak, she was homeless and with her children hiding in some motel because of death threats, right? So in the US, we have a Black or Black South Asian vice president. That becomes the highest expression so far of Black women's access to state power. But we also have Black women who are undocumented having their organs removed, right? And Black women allowing that to happen, not working in solidarity to shut down the clinics. And this is unfolding within the carceral framework. So the carceral framework in the United States is tied to chattel slavery. So the short version of this would be, we've always been destabilized. And so the question of how you pursue a sisterhood or feminism in zones that are so destabilized that they're on some level technically war zones. And so I know we will hear about what's going on with the Kurdish women and how they battle and fight, but I'm gonna make the claim of my understanding and the experience, and I cannot speak for all Black women, obviously in the US, but a certain sector of us who are radical will say, this has always been a militarized zone. So Derek Chauvin, 30 minutes before he's convicted of murdering George Floyd, right? Police shoot a 16-year-old girl in foster care in the chest and kill her on the street. And, you know, she had a knife or didn't have a knife, a fight, not a fight. It's sort of irrelevant to the Black experience. You know, George Floyd had no weapon, no knife. It's the precarity of it. So back to reproduction. Harvard psychologists released a study last year that said that we're monitoring Black women and reproductive health. It was in the California area. And basically, you know, if you go to some of the science sites, you'll find this study. Unfortunately, you know, I didn't write anything down, so this is a conversation. But basically, if a Black person is shot by the police and they are armed, it has no impact on the pregnant Black mother, not on her well-being or the vitality of the fetus or the baby. If the Black person is unarmed, the study showed that the mother's anxiety exacerbated risk in pregnancy and the birth weight of the baby diminished. And the only logic I could bring from that is that an unarmed Black person who's killed by the state can be representative of all Black people, because it's like you're, you know, driving while Black, shopping while Black, crossing the street while Black, you know, it's just sort of under this form of police surveillance and devastation, and even the poverty of incarceration, you know, of family members. Once you go into prison, your earning rate is 50% less. So the men, the boys who come out of prison, where are they going to? They're going to their mothers, their grandmothers. I mean, women are assuming the reproduction of family under siege. So if you're pregnant and you read in the news, or you hear in the neighborhood, or you hear at the grocery store, or you hear it on TV, that an unarmed Black person is killed, as Aslam pointed out, you know, I.W. Wells is one of my ancestors, right? The anti-lynching is about the fact that there is no innocence appended to Black people in relationship to white rage and white terror. So then your health deteriorates and your baby's health deteriorates, right? So it's an aberration in the reproductive cycle that has been normalized as standard. So destabilization is the norm in Black struggle. Okay, so what do you do with that? I have no answer, but here's some attempts to deal with it. You know, I was talking to 20-something-year-olds. I've been organizing with 20-something-year-olds, Black women, feminists, LGBTQ, trans, and they found me. It wasn't my preference. It's, you know, at a certain time, I just want to read, you know, and I've adopted, you know, so I'm like, I just want to parent, read, you know, do my thing. But they found me based on mothers whose sons have been killed, you know, by police. And so I agreed to organize, and then I saw the precarity of the organizing because of the grief, right? And the rage. And where do you direct it? Outwardly towards the state, which will punish you, inwardly towards your collective, women against other women. You haven't had a murdered child by the police, so you defer to someone who has, even if their politics are revolutionary. It's just like a whole swirl, right? So I was talking to the 20-something-year-olds, and I was like, look, if we're going to do this summit next month on accountability and social justice, in part, it's because millionaires have grown out of Black Lives Matter. So I know people who were in prison. I mean, it wasn't mentioned. I anthologized political prisoners for about 8 years, and they fought the state, and they were tortured. A number of them are out. Others are dying from cancer or COVID inside right now. But, you know, back to the youth. So if we're going to organize as feminists, right, what does this look like unless you have an origin story? And I think this, you know, I don't want to go over my time, but I think the origin stories of Black struggle and Black suffering are more easily embraced if they remain an abstraction or something you can put on a t-shirt. Or, I mean, actually Black misery is marketed in the US. I mean, that's how you get honoraria in tens of thousands to talk about police killings. And this is how you get the t-shirts that are coming out and the gear and the movie deals, right? I'm not laughing because it's funny. I mean, like I always say, I laugh when I'm angry. So I was trying to get the youth on board about origin stories, and I don't think they want origin stories. And of course I can't impose that on them, but I was trying to suggest that if you could tell people where you come from, right? What brought you to this moment without fear of backlash or being condemned, then maybe we could stitch together some coherent narrative of struggle that would stabilize our zones, right? So I'm going to offer briefly mine. Like, I can't ask them to do stuff that I'm not willing to do. So I was politicized in the 1980s by white communist women in New York City who asked me to join the party, and I said no, because I didn't think it was really relevant in the 1980s. Could have been wrong, right? Probably was wrong, but I said no. But until I said no, they agreed to work with me. After I said no, I was kind of banned. So, you know, that was kind of my introduction to the CPUSA. If you get on board with women and discipline yourself to a party line, you're welcome to work. If you've been working basically for free because nobody's paying you, but you want to have autonomy of thought, or, you know, maybe I want to organize with the Black Caribbean women in Brooklyn who reflected a certain sensibility and militancy that wasn't reflected with the women who were focused on the Soviet Union, the USSR at the time. So yeah, I went to the Soviet Union a couple of times. But the women in Brooklyn who were going to Africa had a different analysis of when the Soviet Union would fall. And when I would say, well, the sisters in Brooklyn say that, you know, Gorbachev is going to cut a deal with Reagan, the bourgeois white women in the party would like laugh that off. And then what happened? Gorbachev cut a deal with Reagan, right? And when the sisters in Brooklyn say, because I would go to meetings representing, you know, the white Communist Party in Manhattan, and the Black women they were nice, but they were also hostile. Like, you're playing with the wrong crew. Like, why are you there? Come over here. But I'm like, oh no, I'm fine over here. Let me do this for a while. Bye. But when the Black women were focused on what was going on in the so-called third world, they actually got it right, because they understood, again, I'm going back to destabilization zones. I mean, the whole liberation movements are terrorized by the West, and then CIA, which, you know, it's just the fun of being an American, right? So what they were saying had a kind of cogent analysis, but it never radiated up in the academy or to the level of prominent communist women who would become iconic figures, because they were dealing with the local NYPD, who I also protest against, and they will just seriously mess you up on the street. And they were dealing with the disposability of Blackness, and they were internationalists, but in a Black Pan-Africanist modality. And they were feminists as well. that is a different kind of feminism. And it doesn't mean it's not compatible with the other forms. It's that it doesn't get recognized because it's subordinate to the other forms, right? So the time that I realized that I was most connected to feminism, which is 85, Nairobi, still in the origin stories part. And I was in the compound with the WIDF, the Women's International Democratic Federation, that formed as an anti-fascist organization in 1945. I believe they tried to have their first conference in India. Once India realized they were communists and anti-fascists, it's like, no, and they ended up with the first conference in China. But that's where I met the women of all the liberation movements that were anti-capitalist. That's where I met the PLO women, the SWAPO women, the ANC women, FMLN, right? And we had armed guards because it was all the women's leadership of guerrilla movements around the world. So you had to keep them alive. I was just a grunt. I carried people's luggage, did stuff like that, right? But in that space, I will be honest, that's the first and the last time I ever saw that kind of international commitment because anti-fascism made us focus. And then if I fast forward today, I would call myself a captive maternal. I would not call myself a feminist. I will just go ahead and state bourgeois Black women took over feminism in Black communities. That's just how it rolled. And we could debate all day, but I know it because I'm there. I work for a very prestigious bourgeois site. I know everybody, and I also know the working class. And the ideology of feminism is shaped by Black bourgeois women who are aligned, even as Marxists or whatever they call themselves, to capital and to the state, because they campaigned for Obama, who kind of ramped up drone strikes against Africa and definitely was skewed towards monopoly finance capital. And we were also told to vote for Biden Harris, which is better than a proto-fascist or full-blown fascist as Trump. But there was never an option for an independent, radical, revolutionary feminism not aligned to one of the two parties in an imperial state. Obama was the first Black imperial president, but you're not supposed to say that out loud. And so this distribution of money, and I'll close with this, has worked completely against the youth. Unless they agree to become professionalized activists who join nonprofits that are funded by finance capital. Finance capital never funds a revolution against itself. And so what is feminism? When Black people become the iconic register for suffering, not for agency, or agency from the past in the militant era becomes like a Hollywood movie or a t-shirt or a poster on the wall. It means that we have become an abstraction of an abstraction. So for me, the captive maternal has 5 phases. The first is that of the conflicted or celebratory caretaker. The second phase is that of the protester. The third phase is the maroon, the marronage, that, you know, this is hostile territory. We need to build our own freedom schools because the public schools are messing up our kids and the charter schools are prepping them to join the military, right? But when you create a maroon state, as they knew in Jamaica, in the Seminoles, we did with Indigenous Seminoles in Florida, the state always comes for your autonomy. You are not allowed to be free and independent. You can be free and assimilated, but you can't be independent. And so the fourth stage is that of war resistor. And in the 60s and 70s, it was COINTELPRO, FBI, I mean, serious assassinations. I mean, I'm not even gonna list them, everybody knows. But by the 90s, a lot of money was invested in cultural studies and the kind of bourgeois feminism, and people began to rewrite feminism. The Kambahi collective began because Black teenagers and young Black women were found murdered and their bodies dumped in dumpsters or trash cans in Boston. That is a war zone. I don't know if it's your pastor doing the serial killing, the cops, or your parent, I don't know. But that was the catalyst to forming something like the Kambahi. But every time I hear the Kambahi spoken about now in bourgeois feminism, by Black feminists, it's like identity politics. It's like, wait, no, the catalyst was murder. I mean, seriously, but that's been erased because the way we're reproducing feminism now cannot deal with structural violence. It can't, because if you did, you wouldn't just talk about US domestic policy, you would have to talk about US foreign policy. And once you do that, it like trips on the lights in so many places for punitive responses, loss of funding, marginalization. Because we've inherited feminism, and this is the last word, and Sylvia Federici spoke it, the phrase state feminism. I wrote about state feminism and shadowboxing 20 years ago, because it was clear to me 20 years ago, after I was trained by very prominent people to be abolitionists, whatever, that we were on the trajectory of state feminism as Black women. So, and there would be 3 phases or stages in that you would be either a revolutionary and you would be marginalized to the best of whoever's ability to marginalize you. You would be an anti-revolutionary, to say the revolutionaries are infantile and are not focused, nostalgic about the past, don't know how to work with people. Or you would be counter-revolutionary, which literally the CIA is doing now by having commercials to recruit with a Latino mother, single mom, who talks about her anxiety and she's on meds, but how the CIA made her proud to be a Latina. And then they have another commercial where Black lesbians say, well, finally we have the rainbow flag and we can join the CIA. Like, do you not know what the CIA does? And it's like, no, it's like benign. So US terror is just made increasingly benign because of the propaganda. And the only counter is coming from the streets. But they have no standing with the bourgeoisie. So what option do you think they will take? And who will protect them? So I have more questions than answers, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joy James. There is so much on the table. And I want to now go to Sarah Marcha, who will maybe, offer some of the answers as to how the Kurdish women's movement and the genealogy institutes have tackled some of these questions in revolutionizing their societies against these angles, axes of oppression and exploitation. Sarah Marcha, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much. It was a lot of things that has been said. Like from here, so we are in North and East Syria, which is also a part of the west part of Kurdistan, called also Rojava, where there is a war that it's ongoing since more than 5,000 years. Because when we speak about oppression, when we speak about patriarchy, colonialism, we have to see in the history where the women and the community also lost their freedom. I will come back to this point after, but just to say that, of course, all the things that have been said, it's like one reality that we are living here, because all the hegemonical power are involved in now the attacks in the region where we are, and also all the different population and all the women of different communities here are trying to continue with the revolution that starts in 2012 and continuing organizing and finding a common solution. So what is very important, it's like when we speak about feminism or women's liberation or anti-patriarchal and anti-capitalist like struggle, we every time have to see clearly that this situation in humanity has not been every time like this. Like there were a time before which it's called generally like prehistorical time, but we don't call it like this because it's the most longer time in humanity. We call it the natural society, which were like pre-patriarchal societies, where patriarchal structures, hierarchical structures, colonization didn't exist. So this is something that it's possible. This is something that already exists. And this is most of this time that humanity developed itself. What like a lot of communities, as the Kurdish communities here that are resisting to capitalism, colonialism, and patriarchy, they could keep some values from that time, and these communal values based also on to live in freedom together. It's the base of the revolution today. Also, if we look all over the world, these values are also still existing, and against the terrible situation where we are now as humanity, what it's making that we can continue fighting and resisting in this, it's a mutual support we have to each other. And as also a friend said before, like the women are every time playing a leading role in it. What happened, it's like we have to look at our common history as women, which is not like the question of liberation of women and communities. It's not starting because of capitalism, but much more before. And because we could not, as humanity, find like a way to stop the oppression and to come to unite together and to keep values of freedom, we could not reach the liberation until today. So the proposal in Rojava, but also from all the Kurdish women's movement, that it's a movement that has more than 40 years of experiences, it's to meet as women. First, to build our own autonomy, to know each other, to know our history, to know how the system divides us, how the system put our different communities one against each other, and to understand this historical process and to put the link in our reality today, in our common needs. As also it has been said that there are a lot of movement, ecologist movement, anti-capitalist, anti-fascist, anti-racist, feminist movement, but we could not until today to find a mechanism to organize together in order to break the hegemonical powers that organize together to continue with their project against humanity. So first, because of this, in Rojava, for example, with the leading experience of the Kurdish woman movement, that other women from different nations or people or beliefs, also as Assyrian woman, Arabs woman, Muslim woman, Christian woman, Yazidi woman, Alevi woman, in also other part of Kurdistan, other place of Middle East, place from Europe, from America also, are now coming together and trying to make discussions, to make research, not just in a theoretical process, but also in the practice, and trying to organize together. So we have the genealogy, which is the science of the woman and life, because woman, it's linked to life. Woman, it's everything in the communal and social process of resistance, and also to build solution. So when we speak about a woman, we don't speak just about patriarchy, but we speak about all the areas in the life. We speak about education, we speak about economy, about health, about self-defense, about communication, etc., about ecology, about democracy, about how to lead our community to build peaceful system together. And so we make this research now together, because until today, in feminist, we can say movement, the problem it's like we like have debates to try to push everybody to see the different kind of oppression that we are living in, but we don't find a way to put all of this in common. And so we stay fragmented, and more we will be fragmented more every time, like the system, patriarchal, colonial, and capitalist system will divide us more. We are divided in different, by nationalism, by sexism, by classism, by difference between religion, etc. So now we try to take this in our hand all together, and to take the project of democratic confederalism of women as the base for organize all the areas of the life. So today, for example, in all part of Kurdistan and different part also of the world, we try to build like a woman autonomous system, which can like where all the women from different origin, culture, background can participate, but with a challenge to erase all kind of oppression, hierarchy, and to not just deconstruct, but to find inside of us what also the system assimilate us in. For example, now all the Orientalism, for example, I can speak as a European woman, for example, that we carry on. All the colonialism, all the patriarchy that also as women or part of all this community, all the liberalism also that we carry on inside us, and to try to challenge each other, but to go together. And so now we think that also in the world, like this international organization of health, of like United Nations, like all this kind of systems that are made by the hegemonical power to keep their power inside the world and on the society. We think that we have to organize, of course, in a local way, with all the diversity that it's existing and the richness that it's existing in our territories in terms of historical values that we could keep, communal values, freedom values, but also the resistance, to be aware of it and to go together, but also in a global level. If we don't find a way as women to meet each other, to organize, to make what we call a social contract, so in which world we want to live, how we want to live, what we accept, what we don't accept, thinking on women, oppressed people, nature, because nature also it's a fundamental point in our struggle, and to stop the war in an economical level, psychological level, in like by weapon also, like what it's killing every day, what it's killing our soil, what it's killing our bodies, what it's killing our communities, what it's killing our identities also. So now I could speak a lot, but just to say that what we think, it's like we need to make a step more with all the critics that has been done from the feminist and all different freedom struggles around the world, and to make the step of a new organization based on the autonomy of the woman, as also Joyce said, like to speak about what means sisterhood, or like here we also speak about the woman love, how we love each other, linked to our communities, linked to humanity, linked to nature, and basing it in the reality that we are living in.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sarah. This is great. I am now gonna raise some questions now that Sarah has spoken about the Kurdish women's liberation movement, and there are some questions to Professor Federici and Joy James about linking and maybe commenting on this. So the first question is a little bit more specific. I'm going to start with this to Dr. James. It says, you mentioned that Black women and communities are in a war zone, which puts limits on their resistance. Self-defense is a central part of the Kurdish women's freedom movement, both against external attacks and against gender violence within the Kurdish communities and the revolution in Rojava. So they're asking for your thoughts on using violence as a tool of self-defense and resistance in your, especially the mention of captive maternal, that how you would engage the concepts of genealogy and specifically self-defense in genealogy with the captive maternal. So we can start with that one.
Yeah, okay, thanks for the question. So the pause is because in the US, we're disciplined not to talk about self-defense unless it's in the form of self-care. So a lot of the dominant narrative right now is that you don't respond to violence with violence. And actually, I think if you analyze it, it's the only cases where I've heard prominent feminists acknowledge the possibility has been against your domestic batterer. So a number of Black women who've gone to prison for, just shooting in the air or actually, shooting someone, or younger people like teenagers, girls who defended their mothers or, defended themselves. It's easier to have a campaign around that, right? Because it's seen as an individual family trauma and as an option of last resort. Women and girls don't tend to get off. I mean, they tend to be incarcerated. So it's different from, George Zimmerman, who kills Trayvon Martin, who's a 17-year-old teenager, right? He can get acquitted on the self-defense because even though his mother's Latino or whatever, he still registers as a white man. So the notion that Black women would have access or wield any kind of autonomy around their bodies that would engage in violence, it's prohibited. I mean, it would have to be because of the enslavement era, right? Because then you just would kill your rapist, who's usually your white master, in which, so that's when you start getting mass lynchings as instructive, like, don't even think about it. Having said that, I have been told by scholars that one of the largest growing demographics in purchasing guns is Black women. And I'm mixed about that, not because I'm strictly against guns. I grew up in a military family. I was in ROTC. I was supposed to be in the military. So I know how to shoot. I was doing it from a kid, right? I would go to like military parades to watch my father march up and down or jump out of air. So I'm socialized to violence because that's what the US military does around the globe. How does this work pragmatically in the US? If you're Black, it tends not to work. And this is what people were saying about the attempted coup at the Capitol. If the people who invaded the Capitol, like, as the white men and women did, if they were Black, they probably would have been shot before they got, up the stairs. And it wouldn't be like, let's escort you out or use less lethal. It would be like, what do we have in the arsenal that looks like it's, counterinsurgency military gear? And that's what would be levied against us. So we're historically socialized over centuries not to respond. We still respond, but there is no political narrative in prominent or dominant Black feminism which would legitimize the response of material violence. It's prohibited by the Black feminists who dominate the discourse. So if you do it, that's kind of your side thing. And if it goes south and it's not about your personal domestic batterer, because like the logic would be, what if you were at a peaceful protest and the NYPD started to break open your skull? Do you have the right to fight the NYPD and still be alive? Or should you fight the NYPD? I mean, if you can fight your partner who cracked your head open, but you can't fight a white cop, then you're sending two different messages. So there's no consistency. And in terms of my own opinion, you have the right to self-defense. And then like bail funds to get you out of bail. Hopefully we can keep you alive and not tortured. But when Black people engage in self-defense, even just the rhetoric of it, it is an incredible, it triggers white supremacy. It just, people lose it, you know, and that's the notion that you get to defend Black life is prohibited. And if you think about Tatiana Jefferson, the Black woman who's shot in Texas by a white cop who shot through the window in her chest, she had a weapon with her. But based on what little training I had, it's not enough to have the technology. You have, it's really a mindset. The 8-year-old nephew is in the room. She is standing in front of the window. That is a clear chest. I mean, she's not even at the side. And I'm not disparaging somebody who's dead, right? But we would have to be trained, and we would have to have the mindset to stomach what would follow if we exacted the right to self-defense the same way white reactionary men do it on a regular basis. And it's not self-defense on their part, it's predatory.
Thank you, Joy. There is a question to Professor Federici, a broader question of connecting, reflecting on the Kurdish women's liberation movement. Do you see the theory and practice of genealogy as explained here by Sarah compatible with your own analysis, is the question. Sylvia, can you please unmute?
What Sarah has presented, you know, is very compatible. You know, but on so many levels, obviously, because you know, you cannot fight, you know, for the liberation of any group unless you fight for the many forms of colonialism and the many forms of oppression, unless you fight for the system that requires permanent warfare. I mean, as we are talking, for example, you know, in Palestine, there is a war of extermination of Palestinian people. And all these issues, these are issues that have to be part of our mobilization. It's difficult in a short time, actually, to mention all the places in Colombia. Think of it, in the last 2-3 weeks, you know, almost 400 people disappeared, and we know they've been executed in Colombia, like for an insurrection against the massively unjust, new tributary law. And so, I mean, it's impossible actually to, fight against any form of oppression, unless in a sense you fight against the whole. I think my work and my presentation is also trying to look at the logic. What is the logic that keeps the system going? And for instance, one of the aspects of the devaluation of reproduction of the logic that I was putting forward is the expulsion of people from their lands. And that's what we have seen now for years and years. I mean, this has been through the whole history of capitalism, is one of the most structural, systemic elements of a capitalist society. This constant separation of people from their land, and being allowed to remain on the land only as a rentier, somebody who is renting it, and as a wage labor, as a slave labor, but not as somebody who has actually can use the fruits of the land for their own reproduction. And so there is a big struggle now, by women, across the world, for example, on the issue of land. I think that's one of the novelty respect of, for instance, the 1970s. In the 1970s, when the feminist movement, began, and we look at the issue of reproduction, women, reproduction, how it connects with capitalism, the history, the oppression. And we looked at that. A lot had to do with the sexuality, domestic work, procreation. And more, that struggle reproduction is expanded to the issue of land, to the issue of, the contamination of the earth, the mining, etc. And also the important element in Sarah's presentation, the question of memory, right? The question of the reconstruction of the collective memory and how important that in the struggle. When people say so-and-so presente, it really means, something very concrete that unless, you connect with that history, right? You cannot really fight and gain the courage to take on, to oppose a system which is so violent, which is so murderous, a system that constantly needs sacrifice zone and sacrifice people. They actually use this term. They actually speak of sacrifice zone. Even those in sacrifice zone, the zone where you throw the uranium, you throw the nuclear waste, but where actually the people then go to live. And unless you gain, the connection with the history, with something which is bigger than us, with something that is bigger than our bodies, than our individual life, it's difficult also to build the courage to stand up, to this system. And so the question of history is very important. Yeah. And, on the question of self-defense, I think that, it's very true. If the price you have to pay now to defend yourself, look what's happening in Palestine. They're killing people, right? You really also need to, strengthen ties, strengthen relationship in the community. I just want to say, that I've been in a lot of discussion, for example, in Colombia too, we women in the Cauca Valley, one of the areas that now is mostly under attack. These are women, the Cauca Valley is a women of a Quilombo area, where the Maroon people created a whole other society. And this is an area that recently has been invaded by mining company, gold mine. So they're pouring arsenic everywhere. And so an area of massacres and so on. And they said over and over and over, the best way they can defend themselves, it's really building strong ties among the women themselves in the community. It's those strong ties, not being afraid of, this is my private life, this is my home, this is like breaking down those walls that have been built. That this in a way is the best defense, where you create a whole community that is constantly thinking for each other and is constantly on the alert and is constantly thinking of ways in which you can protect each other.
Thank you. Thank you both. There's a question to Sarah. What do you think is a man's place in the breakdown of patriarchy as a larger system? So what's the role of the man? What is in the breaking of the system and afterwards, I would say?
Yes, in genealogy and how we see the woman revolution for concretely Kurdistan, but also Middle East and all the world, it's like we say that we will not be able to free ourselves as women or as a society if we don't also free the men from patriarchy, from this masculinity that has also been built through history, through social process that make that every time the system reproduced by itself, no? Through this mentality. So we speak every time about the project of transforming the men mentality and understanding like killing like the dominant male mentality and to build a free society through the mentality of human freedom linked to ecology and to democracy also. And this is also part of self-defense. So how we see self-defense here in Kurdistan and in genealogy in general, it's like to know your history, to know where you are coming from, and not just from the part of the oppression, but also from the part of what the resistance built. It's part also of your self-defense. If you don't know who you are, how you will defend your identity, how you will defend your being, no? And in that terms, the Kurdish women are really also an example, as a lot of women around the world, but in Kurdistan, because from a very, very ancestral time, there is still a lot of things in the culture that it's continuing. And most of the times there is a woman that defends it. One of the points very important is the language, for example. How much in terms of genocide, of assimilation from the different nation states that occupied Kurdistan, also from liberalism, from the Western mentality trying to impose a new model in Middle East, and still the community and mostly the mothers also play a very important role in defending their culture and their identity, and not letting this modern capitalist model implementing in the area. Also, education is fundamental when we speak about self-defense. Also, education play a very, very important role, because the problem it's not also that you don't know something. The problem is when you know something, but you don't act when you know. And a lot of time, why we don't act? Because we know what is wrong, but a lot of time we don't know what we want to do. And the process of education in Kurdistan, it's like to know who we are and what we want and how to do it. And this is what I think, and in genealogy, we speak a lot about this. It's like, what is the difference now and what it brings this revolution on the territory? Another thing, it's of course like science and knowledge, no? How we build our knowledge, from which kind of perspective, from epistemology, from cosmovision, with which methodology, how we make that the knowledge from the society will not be worse, be lost, sorry, and how we recover all the knowledge that has been trying by the power to be destroyed, to keep it, and also to develop a kind of knowledge that will bring something for our society. And so all this, it's part also of the self-defense, to build also your own system, autonomous system in economy, in politics, to discussing about justice also, to try to not refer every time to the state or to the NGOs, or to try to find the solution from something that it's out from the community, from the society, and that it's reproducing the same, the roots of the problem. So in Kurdistan, this is the idea of self-defense. And of course, when you will build this autonomy, when you will resist to the system, every time the system will attack you. So you have to adapt, you have to organize to defend yourself against a system that you can continue creating and building. And this is what is happening in Kurdistan, of course. Every time we say that nobody wants to take the weapons, of course. But now the population and mostly the women don't have other choice. But there is another issue, not the war. And also to speak about what we want to construct, what like the weapon can be a tool, but in another place, the tool can be other things. But also we don't have to forget that we can face a direct physical, genocidal attack from the system, and that every time to be ready to adapt ourselves, to defend our existence. And most of what it's important, it's to be together, think that what can happen in Kurdistan can have a lot of consequences in America. What is happening in Latin America can have a lot of consequences in Africa or everywhere. So to try to come together to speak about this and to build the justice and to find the truth in it.
Thank you, Sarah. So there are many questions, both from the YouTube viewers and here in the chat. We won't be able to address them all, but what I am going to do is I'm going to try to connect some of these and ask Sylvia and Joy to comment on this. So there are three questions I see related to the notion of institutionalized motherhood, theory of mothering being institutionalized, and what do you think about this? And related to this, there's the question of biological reproduction. Both of you pointed out how biological reproduction cannot be taken out of the picture. So the question here is, what are the common needs and the creation of commons that could help us in the creation of the necessary social contract? And here Sarah was also talking about the alliance among feminists. But a question I'm also going to connect, especially when we focus on biology, or some of the biological aspects of reproduction, then the question comes from especially the trans women, and there's a question about how can you stand in solidarity and build solidarity between trans women and the feminists if you recognize this type of a biological reality. So those are, I think, connecting mothering, biological reproduction, and the issue of trans solidarity. If you could address these, Sylvia and Joy, as the last question. Sylvia, can you please unmute?
To me, the question of biological reproduction, I mean, in our society, we never live biology, experience biology pure, unconstructed. Obviously there's certain objective reality. It takes 9 months to have a child, but how that is interpreted, what kind of practices, social, cultural practices are built upon it, varies. So biology is always experienced through cultural medium, and so through political, cultural decision making. And this is something I think the women's movement insisted upon from the very beginning. I think we were, from the very beginning, feminism in the 70s made a critique of biologistic conception of women, biologistic conception of reproduction. So I think that the issue is the institutionalization of mothering. I think that has been something that, again, I think feminists have fought against, the imposition of mothering as women's destiny, right? And that all hypocritical celebration of mothering that is being built upon it. Then on one side, it has been made into a duty. You're not a real woman unless you have children, etc., etc. And on the other side, the complete devaluation. So you get Mother's Day, and then for 364 days, you are in misery, alone, working a lot, working sometimes 2 jobs, working sometimes 3 jobs, and having no money, and not consider any work, no pension, depending on a man, all of that. So it's tremendous hypocrisy, double talk, and at the same time institutionalized in a way that for many women it's been very difficult to escape that. And I think so. I don't think that there is a conflict between trans women and other women. I don't see that there is a conflict. I think there is a question of reappropriating. This is a task for all, and reappropriating, maternity, the ability to have children, if we want it, and not to have them if we don't want, and to have them under condition that we decide, not in condition that cost our life, not in condition that immiserate us. And, I mentioned before that now this issue is, in the United States is really, really very important, because, we have seen, for instance, the discrimination in the case of Black women, women of color, and also proletarian women, white women are poor, who have no resources. Go to the hospital. You go to the hospital with fear. You don't go to the hospital to have a child, in a mood to celebrate, but you have with fear. And in fact, the institution of a doula, of a woman that comes with you, that in a sense is in charge of defending you, because there is an experience of being humiliated, not being believed. Look at the story of Serena Williams, not being believed when you complain and you say that you have a problem, right? And so the having, basically that's what I talk about, commoning of reproduction, right? Women used to give birth in a collective environment, surrounded by other women. Now often you face one-to-one with a doctor, right? And with the one with, a whole system that is not really geared. It's geared today to get you out of the hospital as quick as possible and not giving you the time. So I think we have to reclaim, recuperate, right, our relationship to maternity. So the maternity becomes something that we choose and not something that we are forced into. And becomes one of the options in terms of our life. And it becomes not something that is all consuming, and something that we can live in a way that is celebratory and not in a way that actually puts our life in jeopardy and more than our lives. Yes.
Yeah, I agree with what Sylvia stated. I would just add a bit more, maybe starting with the point that she made about the disparities in reproductive health based on race. And so some of the data shows that it's not even about class, that you could be a Black woman who has an MD, who is in the same economic status as a white woman who is also a medical doctor, but the way in which healthcare is delivered to you as a pregnant woman is substandard. And so you have higher rates or possibilities of losing your child. And so if that can help him when you're, like you said, Serena Williams, right? If it can happen to Serena Williams, it could happen to the woman who's the bus driver, right? Or who's unhoused or homeless. And so the class disparities mingle with the race. I don't even want to call it disparities, but the aggression shaped around race and perceptions of who feels pain. I mean, there's a lot of data that, Black people perceive they don't feel pain. So when they give you medication, they give you less, or when, they're drugging to control you, they give you more. So, and the history of experimentation during slavery, I mean, that's how gynecology, the science evolved in the US, is they didn't even give anesthesia to enslaved Black women. They just started operating on them, right, to figure out how, quote, things work. So in that long lens, which you don't have to read in the book because people know in the community, why would you go to a doctor when you needed one? And so the need for doulas and midwives is very important, but you also have to struggle against the apparatus, of a financial industry, right, which is medicine in the US, because we don't have universal health care. I mean, Bernie Sanders tried, among other people, and were defeated by a multiracial coalition that included women, right? That it was impractical. But even once you have the child, you literally have to keep the child alive. And so there's another stressor. Like you could talk about hypertension and stress, like in the, so it's not a meme, but it should be common knowledge, right? Particularly with the police killings, about the talk. Like Black parents give their kids the talk about how you should be deferential to police so that your kid can survive encounters with the police. And so to have a child and raise them is not a guarantee of longevity for that child. I mean, what triggered the civil rights movement was not Rosa Parks giving up her seat, but Emmett Till being lynched in August. And Rosa Parks says she was thinking about that when she wouldn't give up her seat. Even the 1963 March on Washington, where Martin Luther King has this beautiful oratory, like, I have a dream, and like the Black child's playing with the white child. I mean, literally Black socialists engineered that historic event to happen on the anniversary of Emmett Till's murder. So there's like code within code, like we're just signaling each other like, oh, we want to keep our kids alive, but we can't keep our kids alive. So maybe we need a movement beyond I have a dream. So there's this crosstalk. So what would be tangible? I've been thinking about if in the US, and I appreciate what Sylvia said about Colombia, there's a lot of death and killings in Brazil as well under Bolsonaro that's going on. I wish we had a stronger movement about the well-being of children, and that feminism, and Sylvia mentioned this before, didn't see child rearing. It's not just childbearing, but child rearing as an imposition. That, you know, it's actually this beautiful challenge. It's also, well, like totally, you know, you always fail as a parent, right? But it is this, it's in a kind of labor that can't be fully articulated because it's so multidimensional and it's almost like magical, right? Like here's a new human being who has all this potential. But if we had a movement that was child-centered, but not maternalistic or paternalistic, but really pushed against the state around demanding, I would be happy for a general strike or something, just demanding that children got everything they needed. And it wasn't just within, you know, the US as an empire thing, but globally, like every child gets protection. So I will go back to 85 when I said I was with all these women from around the globe. One of the things we were petitioning and trying to get the, you know, signatures to present to the Reagan administration was a children's Bill of Rights. And I can't remember all the details because it was decades ago, but our understanding as women and as feminists that the care for the child or children globally was a mandate, and that would mean opposition to anything that would harm the mother and custodial parent, right? Because father's mother too, even though I don't know why I gendered that function, or maybe I do know why. But I would really like to see this movement where liberalism, state feminism can kind of like step down a notch or two and talk about impoverished children, trafficked children, you know, mothers getting decent medical care, enough food and attention, like globally, and make that a primary right and mandate for feminism.
Thank you, Joy. There are so many questions, as I said, on the table, but I'm going to do a last one to Sarah, since, you know, these forms of state violence against women, femicide, women's oppression in different forms, and in Rojava, there is being practices of self-defense. And so because there's that active practice, you could maybe comment on how there is resistance, and there is successful resistance against forms of femicide, other than obviously in the form of war that's coming from outside. And so in this war zone, how self-defense is being practiced, utilized, and also there is, you know, because both Joy and Sylvia talked about raising children, there's also, you know, these types of issues, that there is the question of isolated housewives, right? There's a system that's being rebuilt, but also still remnants of the old system, which has put women in these domestic spaces exclusively. And so how is this being tackled? And again, we will end with this. It'll probably end at 1:45 because we're a little bit over time. But I wanted Sarah to end this conversation with maybe something that is happening on the ground, something that is tackling a revolution, that is tackling some of these questions that were raised on the ground.
Hey, you know, there is like an idea, like a metaphor, that an image that we use a lot here in genealogy. We say that a bird will never make eggs if the nest it's not built in a safe place, which means like the question of the motherhood. We don't see it, we don't limit it to something that it's biological, but that it's a system of values. It's a system of values, like from where the life is starting, and from this life, in terms of society, in terms of, again, like education, culture, like the way of living, that how you will build it. And how you will build it, not just as individual things, but as a communal thing. So now in Rojava, the first step is to build the communes, and the communes are very important because it's like in each like cities, in each villages, like you will build this like empathy in between the people living together and to try to solve the problem of the society from the society. So in this commune, the communes are mixed, we can say, like general, like men and women together. And in each level, there are a representative that it's a man and a woman first. So, but also the women have their own meetings, their whole system of commune that they will discuss and build also through their needs, through their own point of view, their system. This is one thing. The second thing also, it's the project of democratization of the family, which is to say that like from the liberal system, which is totally like destructing like the society, it's also individualizing extremely like the people, and so making impossible to come together. But in a different system where like the family, it's still also like kind of resistance of the communality, like to make this family becoming democratic. It's mean to take in consideration the gender struggle, the gender liberation, to try to don't make this hierarchical system, patriarchal system in the family, but also to accept the differences of culture, of languages, and like on the territory and with your neighbor, with the different people that you are living with. There are also like a system of mediation made by what we call the women's houses. The women's houses, they are women from the society that most of the time they are old women, which have like experiences and at the same time a respect from their society. And for all the question of problem inside the families, all the problems that the women they will face, question of honors of the woman, the question of forced marriage, the question of marriage of child, like women that they are less than 18 years old, problem of divorce, inequality, that they will like the people can go to them and they will try to make a mediation to solve the problem, but from also an ideological base, trying like to make a change inside the society. The question is really to build social and communal structures that bring a deep change inside the society. And of course, there are different kind of political projects, or like not project, but attacks also on the revolution. That, for example, of course, you have Daesh, like the Islamic State, or the Turkish state and their mercenaries that want to bring like a very patriarchal and nationalist way of living, that put like just see women as sexual object and property, and don't have any kind of possibility to speak, to study, to take decision inside their life. Or also you have different like attacks from the liberal Western model system to try to individualize, to try to bring like kind of freedom, but that it's not connected to the reality, it's not connected to the woman or the family or the reality of the society there, that it's like, for example, putting out the woman or the people from their spirituality, from their history, from their identity. Which is also something that it's not accepted. So again, that, as I said before, the idea is to make self structures and to accept the diversity also, but to make in all level the possibility to construct this gender struggle and not to run away from it. In order to try to really make a social change. There are, of course, a lot of difficulties with this. It's not easy, but it's possible. We see it every day, and it's advancing a lot. And yeah, it's difficult. Now we don't have a lot of time to give so much example, but of course there are different material that for everybody that are interesting in it. And this, it's not just existing in Rojava, which is also very important. It's existing in the fourth part of Kurdistan in different level because of the different conditions, but also in different people all around the world. What it's done in Kurdistan, it's not to build something from zero. It's recovering something that was existing before, that it's still existing, and putting strength on it, and to erase what it's imposed by the dominant system. And yes, so this is very important to see that the revolutionary potential, it's in all the societies, in all women, but we have to adapt it to each reality.
Thank you so much, Sarah, ending on that positive, hopeful note, because there were some questions about whether there is hope. And obviously this continuing, ongoing revolution has offered some alternatives. I'm hoping that when we have more time, we can engage, all of us, further into these questions of, feminist, anti-capitalist realities. And so thank you. I just want to end by thanking our panelists, Sylvia Federici and Joy James, and our discussants, Sarah Marcha of the Andrea Wolf Institute in Northeast Syria, Rojava, on behalf of the Institute of Social Sciences at the Rojava University and the Emergency Committee for Rojava. And thank you so much, all of you who raised questions, who listened through. And we're hoping very much to continue these necessary dialogues in the hopes of creating a free society around the globe. So thank you very much and stay well.
Thank you so much. Bye.